Welcome back, everyone. This week I want to discuss with you the Florida insurance market and why I'm bullish on it, and yet I'm about 2 years too late to the trade. So let's get into this. The Florida insurance market has made some radical changes since late 2022. It's no coincidence that many of the stocks with large exposure to the Florida insurance market not only bottomed around that time, but are up a decent amount since then. 95%, 218%, 526%, and 3,196%. First, I want to share with you how I came across this and how I didn't come across this. Let's go over the second point first. Half of my feed on Twitter is full of old economy, hard asset value investors, along with commodity and event driven, catalyst driven inflection investors. And yet, I don't recall seeing anything mentioned about this. I find that frustrating. The way I came across this theme was by initially being curious about what the trade was around Hurricane Milton. I'm different than most. Most people I know want to manufacture indignation and get mostly riled up about news events, while I want to know how to make money from it. Nonetheless, I came across a few ideas. Mosaic, Aleco, and insurance companies. Once I latched onto the idea of insurance companies, I saw a tweet that said in passing that the Florida insurance market has changed a lot recently. I was curious as to how. Also, I've been wanting for some time to arm myself with facts and information to combat idiots who want to bemoan the cost of insurance going up across America. I thought this was the time. From there, I simply Googled Florida insurance. I also searched Florida insurance on Spotify. Once armed with numerous articles and podcasts, I gave them a read and listened to them. Many of them had a liberal bent to them with titles such as the Climate Change Podcast. And most of them were commiserating with the policyholders and talking trash on the Republicans of Florida. My God, once I was done reading and listening to these publications, I walked away about as bullish as a person could be. The problem is this trade started 2 years ago, LOL. And I've missed at least the first few innings of this trade, if not the whole trade. Also, I know how biased people like to exaggerate. It's not wise to be bullish based upon exaggeration. You know, because exaggeration isn't actual reality. Had I known about this back then, I would have sized this up as a good position. Just read these articles and tell me this wasn't a bullish setup, or just keep reading this article. Here's the links to these articles to the unnamed place in which you can read my stuff. You might notice a different format going on here, and that's because, well, I just want to see what's quite going on at YouTube. So until then, this will be my new format, probably for the remainder of the year. But that's a complete side note. Those links are all from Seeking Rents by Jason Garcia. He also has a podcast. In one of these articles, he posted this chart. The indicated competitive column is essentially how much Citizens needs to raise their rates. Citizens is the Florida state insurer for those who can't get insurance or don't want to pay as much for insurance. Once I saw this chart, my bullishness was a sealed deal. But before delving into that chart, we need a history lesson. Florida's own insurance company. Back in 2002, Florida created a state-run nonprofit property insurance company called Citizens Property Insurance Corporation. It really started taking hold after the rather nasty 2004 and 2005 hurricane season, as seen in the below graph, the blue bars. You can see that it was 17% of the market in 2003, 15% in 2004, 14% in 2005, and then it jumped up to 21% in 2006, 23% in 2007, and it kind of hovered around that area for years. Then, following that time period, the rough 2004-2005 season, we had the great financial crisis, which prevented people from going back to the private markets because they were broke. But a benign hurricane period and the economy picking up again created new entrants to the market with competitive rates. Citizens was a so-called lender of last resort for those who couldn't get coverage elsewhere. To paraphrase Minsky, The lender of last resort will eventually become the lender of only resort. And that's what Florida is afraid of. And the reason is simple. Their actuarial prices aren't actually actuarial, meaning that it's only a matter of time before a large enough hurricane or sequence of smaller hurricanes hit and they'll not have the money to pay out. This is due to not charging a high enough premium. Actuarial is to insurance what all-in sustaining cost is to mining, as far as I'm concerned. It's a bullshit number because it doesn't tell you what people want it to are trying to make it out to be. If insurance companies go bankrupt after catastrophic events like 1 in 100-year storms, it indicates that they did not accurately price in the actual actuarial risk associated with those events. Yet many of them would have sworn that their modeling of matters was accurate. So people want to tell you that citizens could actually lower their premiums due to the actuarial risk, but it's due to the big bad. Yes, so people want to tell you that citizens could lower their premiums due to the actuarial risk that they're assessing, but they're not and or can't because of the big bad corporate greed monsters needing competitive rates. But I just think their models are wrong. Here's a simplification of many of these actuarial models. I'll take in $1 a year anticipating I'll have to pay out 97 cents. And then once every 10 years I'll have to pay out $1.50 due to a bad run of storms or one big bad one. But we'll just pretend like that statistical outlier doesn't exist. You see, I make 30 cents over 10 years and then I pay out 50 cents once every 10 years. That's a loss. That's called being insolvent. That's called not having the liquidity to satisfy your customers. I suspect they're using some sort of traditional actuarial model that assumes that risks follow a normal distribution, which leads to underestimating the probability impact of outlier events, so-called fat tails. The Varbros value at risk measures potential losses in normal market conditions, which doesn't adequately capture extreme events or spikes, as it typically focuses on average conditions. Using standard deviation as a measure of risk downplays the significance of outliers and the subsequent extraordinary costs associated in payouts. This all leads to the underpricing of risk, and I suspect this is being done because to actually price in risk means that premiums are going much higher, and insurers have been either forced by regulation to keep premiums artificially low or attempting to subsidize consumers for one reason or the other. However, it seems that it's changing in the state of Florida. If what I'm saying isn't true, then why is the Senate Budget Committee investigating Citizens? And why did DeSantis himself say they weren't solvent? So, that's the history lesson. Now to modern times. And now to modern times. You can see that once inflation started picking up in mid-2021, so did the policy count for Citizens. Both in part because insurance companies recognized that Florida was no longer viable to do business in and started pulling out, and they were leaving, but also because people couldn't afford their insurance anymore, because the insurance companies that stayed were actually trying to not, be insolvent. And then a lot of people couldn't afford insurance, in part because they weren't deemed necessary workers. Premiums, in part, are tied to the home's value, and home values increased substantially across much of Florida, in part due to a mass exodus fleeing tax harvesting lockdown states. Citizens' market share jumped from 8% to 13% between 2021 and 2022. That's a 62% growth in a single year. Imagine owning a company, a stock that did that. Here's a chart that shows it better. Policy count and total insured value. According to Citizens' most recent market share report, they seemingly have peaked out in 2023, insofar as policy count is concerned. It's not because people are better off or because the private market is a better option, such as in the 2010s, but due to Senate Bill 2A picking up speed. Between Q1 2023 and Q1 2024, their policies in force fell roughly 6%. This is part of their depopulation strategy. They're putting policies back in the hands of private insurers. By looking at Citizens' market share report, we discover that they're the largest player of any insurer in Florida and almost double that of the runner-up. I suspect the drop of market share is going to be even more substantial going into 2025. According to Newsweek, quote, on August 2nd, Insurer Commissioner Michael Jaworski signed an order allowing 10 private insurance carriers to take on 413,808 policies from Citizens beginning in late October, according to a report by Florida Politics. In the last 2 weeks, a further 235,000 were approved for removal beginning in November. Significant legislative reform takes place. In December 2022, Senate Bill 2A, there's a link to it in the PDF, was signed into law. You should note that the elimination of one-way attorney fees and assignment of benefits is due to all the Florida roof scams that were occurring in the state. The scam works like this. Contractors knock on doors offering to inspect homeowners' roofs for storm damage. They say they can help get a roof replacement covered by insurance, and they persuade the homeowners to sign away their rights to file the claims themselves. The contractors then file fraudulent damage claims, and when the insurance companies balk, the contractors sue. The insurance companies usually settle the dispute claims for many times more than their original claim. Most of that money goes to the contractor's lawyers in the form of a contingency fee multiplier. Some lawyers file hundreds of such lawsuits a year. The homeowner may get a free roof, but everyone pays for it through increased rates. Some things that Senate Bill 2A did are elimination of one-way attorney fees. This change means that policyholders can no longer automatically recover attorney fees if they win any amount in a lawsuit against their insurance company. This provision was aimed at reducing frivolous lawsuits. Assignment of benefits. AOB bans the assignment of post-loss insurance benefits for policies issued on or after January 1st, 2023. Prior to this, contractors could take over insurance claims from homeowners, which often led to inflated costs and increased litigation. Then you have Citizens Property Insurance Corp. While Citizens was already the insurer of last resort, changes aimed to reduce its policy count by making it less competitive, raising rates, with the private insurers pushing for depopulation, transferring citizen policyholders to the private market. Reinsurance support through Florida Optional Reinsurance Assistance. I believe they're giving these insurance companies $1 or $2 billion a year, or a discount for reinsurance, which amounts to the $1 or $2 billion. Not sure how or who is paying for that, but nonetheless. Citizens have to set a competitive rate. Now, back to the most bullish image that I noted earlier. You can see, so back to that image. Now, Mr. Garcia, that is, author of the Seeking Rents articles, he did such a fine job explaining why it's bullish. If citizens were simply required to charge actuarially sound prices, let me interrupt here and say that presupposes that the actuarial sound prices are actuarially sound, and then you have to question the concept in a statement as much as the statement itself, which is, how are you calculating actuarial? Like how the VAR bros and the standard deviation people do? Because that's kind of different. That's not a sustainable, iterative business model. Nonetheless, let me start this again. If citizens were simply required to charge actuarially sound prices, the company could reduce its basic rates in Miami by 4%. That's according to Citizens' own calculations. But because DeSantis and lawmakers are once again forcing the nonprofit insurer to artificially inflate its rates, Citizens plans to raise rates in Miami by 14% this year, which is the maximum annual increase it can impose under current law. And it won't stop there. Citizens' calculations show that it could ultimately have to raise homeowners' rates in Miami by more than 80% in order to avoid competing with the private market. Yeah, let me interject here again. Definitely to not actually be actuarially sound. That's right. Florida leaders created a nonprofit insurance company that could lower its rates in Miami tomorrow and still be financially sound. But instead, they have ordered the company to nearly double its prices. End quote. The reason this is bullish is for the private insurers is because Senate Bill 2A includes provisions that require policyholders to accept coverage from a private insurer if the offered rates are within 20% of what they are currently paying with Citizen Property Insurance Corporation. Homeowners are mandated to accept that coverage instead of remaining with Citizens. Beautiful. So here you have Citizens. I'm going to keep the math simple. So I'll say they're charging you $10,000, you're a multimillionaire with your multimillionaire house. They're charging you $10,000 a year for insurance. Okay? And you live in Miami. Well, Miami then jacks your price up 14%. So that's an extra $1,400, so $11,400 that you'll now have to pay in insurance. Well, these private insurers can come along, and I'm not exactly sure how it works, if they're allowed to tack on 19.9% to the $11,400 figure, or if they can tack on 19% to the $10,000 figure. So, you have a $10,000 insurance policy, a private player wants to take you out for, the depopulation, because that's such a lovely term, and they can mail you and say, hey, we want your business and want to take it away from Citizens, and we are going to charge you $11,900 for the same policy. You have to go with them because they're within that 20% window. Is that not bullish? And since Citizens have demonstrated that they plan to keep raising rates, that means that the private insurers can tacitly collude and keep raising rates too, essentially meaning that private insurers have covered to raise rates for multiple more years. Of course, there's competition. There's a competition dynamic at play here, since insurers are now coming back to the states. The below image is from Citizens 2025 recommended rate filing, and don't forget the rate change is capped by law, otherwise they'd be even higher. It's my guess that they'll be maxing out the rate change for 2026 too. This is from their public rate hearing. And let's zoom down to 2025. Citizens rate glide path will increase to 14% per policy, and then 2026 Citizens glide path will increase to and remain at 15% per policy, which is to say they can't raise more than 15%. Citizens are on a glide path of raising rates mid-teens percent for at least the next couple of years, and I suspect that they'll be maxing out the rates for years after that. They're in need of playing serious catch-up to the tune of 96.8%, chart below, in order to be indicated competitive from the bullish chart I keep showing you. 14% cap of the glide path. To be non-competitive, Citizens HO3 rates will need an increase of 96.8% on a statewide basis using December 31st, 2023 policy data. Yes, that's how long years is how long people in Florida have been getting away with underpaying for insurance. I know the articles I've linked you to are not going to say such distasteful things. That's 7 years of 14% increases in order to get to the 96.8%. Roughly 7 years of 14% increases. However, the growth that the private companies are experiencing will abate to some degree due to receiving less and less policyholders from Citizens, but for now, the purge is in full force. Another problem is that more and more competition is coming back to the state. Progressive commits to investing in Florida, joining State Farm and several national carriers and 9 new domestic property insurers following 2023 reforms. One of the bullish things, and one of the reasons why the stocks are up, is because competition was leaving the market, and then policy or legislative changes happened, and now rules changed, and now that competition's coming back. But hey, it's not all about helping the insurance companies. DeSantis cares about his citizens too. That's why he passed Senate Bill 2D in May 2022. It's all here in this handy-dandy one-pager. He reduced your legal right, or what once was, to assign your benefits. He's backing the insurance companies with $2 billion of reinsurance. After all, I don't know any individuals who reinsure their insurance. And he prevents insurance companies from denying coverage based on the age of a roof that is less than 15 years old. Of course, he won't say that the insurance companies are now going to start depreciating the cost of your roof. What does that look like? Say it costs $20,000 to replace a roof and it's determined that its useful life is 30 years. If at 15 years you need your roof replaced, then they'll give you $10,000, the depreciated value of it. Then let's say you have a 2.5% deductible on a $200,000 house, which is not that expensive a house in Florida, or anywhere really. That means that you'll have to pay the other $10,000 for the roof plus $5,000 for the deductible, meaning that they'll end up only paying $5,000 for a $20,000 roof. But hey, they didn't deny you, they just chiseled you down. He's helping the companies help you. Depopulation. Even how the transfer of policyholders is occurring is set up bullishly for private insurers. So much for consumer protection. To quote Seeking Rents again, these takeovers have been pushed along by some classic anti-consumer tactics. For example, when a private insurance company offers to take a policy out of citizens, citizens will mail a notice to the homeowner. And even if the private company's price is more than 20% higher than citizens, citizens will require the homeowner to proactively opt out in order to avoid being transferred. A homeowner who misses the notice or who forgets to respond in time will get punted to the more expensive private policy by default. Some private companies seem to count on Floridians failing to understand the importance of these takeout notices. End quote. You can always count on people to test the boundaries of any rule. He continued to say, quote, in fact, at one point, according to the Florida Office of Insurance Regulation, Slide was sending out takeout offers to citizen customers at prices that were as much as 5 times more expensive than their current premiums. And the targeted homeowners were at risk of getting trapped in those policies simply because they failed to respond to a letter that could so easily be mistaken for junk mail. Slide's tactics prompted the Office of Insurance Regulation to cap takeout offers at no more than 40% of the citizen's price. The new rule went into effect late last year. End quote. Conclusion. You have 16% of the market getting unlocked for private insurers to cherry pick over while not needing to take the riskier ones on. You have years of rate hikes to come from citizens, which will provide cover for the private insurers to stair-step their rates up at mid-teen %. You have legislation that offsets their costs of reinsurance and legislation that help get rid of many of the roof scams that's been plaguing this state by less than ethical trial attorneys. That sounds bullish to me, and it has been. The only question is, will it continue to be? After all, I already said that I'm 2 years late to this trade. Thank you for watching, and until next time.